That's the only goal I have at this point.
Picture this. Two young children vanish from their Nova Scotia home in the dead of night. Their stepfather calls 911, frantic and desperate. But when police arrive and begin their investigation, the first question they ask him isn't, "Where are the children?" or "Who might have taken them?" No. The first question they ask is, "Did you kill Lily and Jack?" If that sends chills down your spine, hit that subscribe button right now, because what you're about to discover will completely transform everything you thought you knew about missing children cases. This isn't just another disappearance story. This is a case where the truth is so shocking, so twisted, that it took 8 weeks of investigation to uncover what really happened to 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan. And I'm warning you now, you need to watch until the very end, because the final piece of this puzzle will leave you questioning everything you believe about justice, family, and how far someone will go to protect the ones they love. May 2nd, 2025. A quiet Friday morning in Nova Scotia, Canada. Most families are just beginning their day, children getting ready for school, parents preparing for work. But in one small home, something was terribly wrong. At 8:30 a.m., the phone rings at the local RCMP detachment. The voice on the other end is Daniel Martell, and he's calling to report that his stepchildren, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan, are missing. "I woke up this morning and they weren't in their beds," Daniel tells the dispatcher. "I've looked everywhere. They're just gone." The children lived with their mother, Maleia Brooks Murray, and her boyfriend Daniel Martell. It should have been a routine missing persons call. Children wander off sometimes. They get curious, they explore, they lose track of time. In most cases, they're found within hours, safe and sound. But this case was different from the very beginning. Within hours of that 911 call, something unprecedented happened. The RCMP didn't just send patrol officers. They didn't just organize a neighborhood search. Instead, they mobilized resources typically reserved for the most serious crimes imaginable. The major crime unit was called in. Digital forensics specialists arrived on scene. The truth verification section, that's polygraph experts, were summoned. And most telling of all, the police dog services were deployed, but not the dogs you might expect. They brought in tracking dogs, yes. But they deliberately did not bring cadaver dogs, the ones trained to find human remains. When asked why, the RCMP gave a chilling response. Any searches involving dogs will be based on information gathered during the ongoing investigation. What information? What did they know that they weren't telling the public? The answer to that question would take weeks to emerge, but looking back now, the signs were there from day one. This wasn't being treated as a missing persons case. From the moment that 911 call came in, police were investigating something far more sinister. Lily Sullivan was 6 years old. She had beautiful brown hair and a gap between her front teeth that made her grandmother smile every time she saw it. She was described as a little princess who brought joy to everyone around her. Jack Sullivan was 4 years old. He was a serious child, the kind who would look at you with intense curiosity when you tickled him, as if he was studying your every move. He had that quiet intelligence that some children possess, an old soul in a young body. These weren't just statistics in a police report. These were real children with real personalities, real dreams, real futures that hung in the balance. And as the hours ticked by on that Friday morning, as the sun climbed higher in the sky and the search efforts intensified, one question haunted everyone involved. Were Lily and Jack still alive? The answer to that question would lead investigators down a path none of them expected. It would reveal family secrets, criminal histories, and a web of lies that stretched back months before the children ever disappeared. But it would also reveal something else. Something that challenges everything we think we know about missing children cases. Something that suggests the most dangerous threat to Lily and Jack Sullivan might not have been a stranger in the night. It might have been the very system designed to protect them. Every family has secrets, but some secrets are more dangerous than others. And in the case of Lily and Jack Sullivan, there was one secret that everyone seemed determined to keep hidden, a secret that would prove to be the first key to understanding what really happened to these children. While the media focused on stepfather Daniel Martell and mother Maleia Brooks Murray, there was another crucial figure in this story who remained largely in the shadows. Cody Sullivan, the children's biological father. Cody's mother, Belinda Gray, had spoken to reporters about her son. She painted a picture of a young man who had simply distanced himself from his children after his relationship with Maleia ended. According to Belinda, Cody had fallen on hard times. He'd lost his job, his apartment, and his car. It was a sad story, but not an unusual one. But Belinda Gray left out the most important detail of all. Court documents tell a very different story about Cody Sullivan. Far from being simply a down-on-his-luck young father, Cody had an extensive criminal record that spanned multiple years. Court cases dating from 2021 all the way up to 2025. And perhaps most significantly, he had another court hearing scheduled for October 10, 2025. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. This was a man who regularly found himself on the wrong side of the law, a man who had multiple ongoing legal issues, a man whose criminal history had been carefully concealed from public view. Suddenly, Maleia's decision to limit Cody's access to the children took on a very different meaning. This wasn't about a bitter custody dispute or a mother being vindictive. This was about a mother trying to protect her children from a biological father with a documented history of criminal behavior. But here's where the story takes an even darker turn. If Maleia was so concerned about Cody's criminal background that she limited his access to the children, why didn't she seek help from the proper authorities? Why didn't she go through official channels to ensure her children's safety? The answer to that question reveals another layer of this complex case. Because it turns out that Maleia Brooks Murray had her own secrets. Her own reasons for avoiding official scrutiny. Her own reasons for keeping her family's business private. And when those secrets finally came to light, they would explain why the police responded to this case the way they did. They would explain why, from the very first day, investigators weren't looking for lost children. They were looking for something much worse. The revelation of Cody Sullivan's criminal history was just the beginning. It was the thread that, when pulled, would unravel a tapestry of lies, cover-ups, and dangerous decisions that put two innocent children directly in harm's way. But even as investigators began to piece together the complex family dynamics, even as they started to understand the real relationships between the adults in this story, they still faced the most pressing question of all. Where were Lily and Jack? The answer to that question would come from an unexpected source. It would come from the very person who had been at the center of the investigation from day one. It would come from Daniel Martell himself, and what he revealed would shock investigators, legal experts, and the public alike. Because Daniel Martell was about to reveal exactly what questions the police had asked him during his polygraph examination. And those questions would prove that from the very beginning, law enforcement knew something that they hadn't shared with the public. They knew that Lily and Jack Sullivan weren't just missing. They knew that Lily and Jack Sullivan were dead. June 19, 2025. More than 6 weeks after Lily and Jack Sullivan vanished from their Nova Scotia home, Daniel Martell made a decision that would change everything. For the first time since the investigation began, he decided to speak publicly about his polygraph examination. What he revealed sent shockwaves through the true crime community and left experts around the world questioning everything they thought they knew about this case. Daniel sat down and began to describe his experience in the interrogation room. He talked about the machines, the electrodes, the clinical atmosphere. He described how nervous he was, how his stress levels were through the roof, how his body didn't know how to react to being questioned while hooked up to electronic monitoring equipment. But then he revealed something that changed everything. The first question they asked me, Daniel said, wasn't about where the children were. It wasn't about whether someone had kidnapped them. The first question was, did you kill Lily and Jack? Think about that for a moment. 2 young children have been reported missing. The natural assumption in any missing persons case is that the children are lost, or have been taken by someone, or have wandered away from home. The natural questions would be, when did you last see them? Who else had access to the house? Where do you think they might have gone? But that's not what happened here. The very first question the police asked Daniel Martell was whether he had killed the children. Not whether he knew where they were. Not whether he had seen anything suspicious. Whether he had killed them. And it didn't stop there. Daniel went on to describe the other questions he was asked during the polygraph examination. Every single question was based on one fundamental assumption, that Lily and Jack Sullivan were dead. Are you an accessory to the murder of Lily and Jack? Do you know who killed Lily and Jack? Are you covering up the murder of Lily and Jack? Not a single question considered the possibility that the children might still be alive. Not one question was based on the idea that they might have been kidnapped. Not one question explored the theory that they had simply gotten lost. From the very first day of the investigation, the police knew they weren't searching for missing children. They were investigating a double homicide. But how did they know? What evidence did they have that led them to this conclusion so quickly? What weren't they telling the public? The answer to those questions would reveal just how much law enforcement knew about this family long before Lily and Jack ever disappeared. It would reveal a history of concerns, a pattern of behavior, and a system that had been watching this family for months. But it would also reveal something else. Something that would make the public question whether the system designed to protect children had failed in the most fundamental way possible. Daniel Martell's polygraph revelation was a turning point in the case. It was the moment when the public began to understand that this wasn't just another missing persons case. This was a criminal investigation disguised as a search and rescue operation. And as the full scope of what law enforcement knew began to emerge, as the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place, one question became more urgent than ever. If the police were so certain that Lily and Jack were dead, why were they still asking the public to help search for them? The answer to that question would come from an unexpected source. It would come from someone who had loved these children more than life itself. Someone who had watched them grow, who had held them when they cried, who had seen them smile and laugh and play. It would come from their grandmother, Belinda Gray. And what she had to say would break hearts around the world while revealing the final pieces of this tragic puzzle. If you're still with me, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now, because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about this case. The truth is more complex, more heartbreaking, and more shocking than anyone could have imagined. 7 weeks. That's how long Belinda Gray remained silent while the world searched for her grandchildren. 7 weeks of watching the news, reading the headlines, seeing the search efforts, and keeping her thoughts to herself. But on week 8, something changed. The weight of her silence became too heavy to bear. The need to speak the truth became stronger than her desire to protect her family's privacy. When Belinda Gray finally decided to speak publicly about Lily and Jack Sullivan, her words would break hearts around the world. But they would also reveal crucial information that explained why this case had unfolded the way it had. With tears streaming down her face, Belinda looked directly into the camera and said the words that millions of people around the world had been dreading to hear. "My heart tells me these babies are gone. I just want them back." This wasn't speculation. This wasn't fear talking. This was a grandmother who knew her family, who understood the dynamics at play, who had seen the warning signs that others had missed. Belinda spoke lovingly about her grandchildren. She described Lily as her little princess, remembering how much she loved that Lily had brown hair and a gap between her teeth, the same gap that Belinda had when she was a child. It was a connection across generations, a physical reminder of the family bond that tied them together. She talked about Jack's serious nature, how he would look at you with intense curiosity when you tickled him, as if he was studying your every move. She remembered his quiet intelligence, his thoughtful demeanor, the way he seemed to understand more than a 4-year-old should. But beneath the loving memories, Belinda revealed something far more disturbing. She told the story of the night that changed everything, the night that proved law enforcement had been watching this family long before the children disappeared. It was 3 a.m. on May 3rd, just hours after Daniel Martell's 911 call. Belinda was asleep in her home when she heard pounding on her door. She opened it to find police officers standing on her doorstep. They weren't there to ask for her help in searching for the children. They weren't there to see if she had any information about where Lily and Jack might have gone. They were there to check if the children were with their biological father, Cody Sullivan. At 3 a.m., hours after the children had been reported missing. Think about what that means. While the public was being told that this was a missing persons case, while search teams were being organized to look for lost children, while the media was reporting on a family's desperate search for their missing loved ones, law enforcement was already focused on one specific theory. They believed that someone in this family was responsible for the children's disappearance. But Belinda's revelations went even deeper. She began to describe the family dynamics that had led to this moment. The tensions between Maleia and Daniel, the concerns about Cody's criminal history, the complex web of relationships that had put these children in danger. And she revealed something else. Something that would prove to be crucial to understanding what happened during those final hours before Lily and Jack disappeared. Belinda Gray had tried to warn people. She had seen the signs. She had expressed concerns about the living situation, about the adults who were supposed to be protecting these children, about the decisions that were being made that put Lily and Jack at risk. But her warnings had been ignored. Her concerns had been dismissed. And now, 7 weeks later, as she sat in front of cameras with tears in her eyes, she was forced to confront the reality that her worst fears had come true. The system that was supposed to protect Lily and Jack Sullivan had failed them. The adults who were supposed to keep them safe had let them down. And now, 2 innocent children were paying the price for the failures of everyone around them. But Belinda's interview revealed something else. Something that would prove to be the key to understanding why law enforcement had responded to this case the way they had from day one. It turned out that Child Protective Services had been involved with this family for months before the children disappeared. There was already a file. There were already concerns. There were already warning signs that should have prevented this tragedy from ever happening. The question was, if the system already knew this family was at risk, if there were already concerns about the children's safety, why weren't Lily and Jack removed from the home before it was too late? The answer to that question would reveal the most heartbreaking aspect of this entire case. It would show how bureaucracy, procedure, and systemic failure had created the perfect storm that put 2 innocent children directly in harm's way. And it would explain why, when those children finally disappeared, law enforcement immediately assumed the worst. Minister Scott Armstrong's words were carefully chosen, diplomatically phrased, and absolutely chilling. We have no idea where these children are, and we should focus on helping them and finding them. But what he didn't say was far more revealing than what he did say. Because Minister Armstrong had just confirmed something that changed everything about how the public understood this case. Child Protective Services had an existing file on Lily and Jack Sullivan. Let that sink in for a moment. Before these children disappeared, before Daniel Martell made that 911 call, before the massive search efforts began, the system designed to protect vulnerable children already knew about this family. They had investigated. They had documented concerns. They had created a file. And somehow, despite all of that, Lily and Jack Sullivan were still living in a situation that would ultimately lead to their disappearance. Minister Armstrong refused to disclose the specific details of that file, citing privacy concerns and the ongoing investigation. But his confirmation that the file existed revealed a truth that was almost too painful to contemplate. The system had seen this coming. This wasn't a random tragedy. This wasn't a case of children disappearing without warning. This was a case where warning signs had been identified, documented, and filed away while 2 innocent children remained in danger. But the failure of Child Protective Services goes even deeper than just having a file. The agency's response to this case reveals that they understood the gravity of the situation from the very beginning. When baby Meadow was born to Maleia Brooks Murray, Child Protective Services was ready. They had protocols in place. They had procedures to follow. And when Maleia violated their orders by fleeing to the Saipekankatik Reservation with her newborn daughter, they acted swiftly and decisively. Baby Meadow was removed from Maleia's care immediately. The system that had failed to protect Lily and Jack had learned its lesson. They weren't going to let another child from this family fall through the cracks. But this rapid response to protect baby Meadow only highlighted the questions about what happened to her older siblings. If the system could move so quickly to protect one child, why hadn't they moved quickly enough to protect the other 2? The answer lies in the complex web of jurisdictions, procedures, and legal requirements that govern child protection cases. It lies in the gap between identifying concerns and taking action. It lies in the tragic reality that sometimes the system designed to protect children moves too slowly to prevent tragedy. But it also lies in something else. Something that would prove to be crucial to understanding why this case escalated so quickly from a missing persons investigation to a major crimes investigation. Law enforcement knew about the Child Protective Services file. They knew about the concerns that had been raised. They knew about the investigations that had been conducted. And they knew that when children from a family that's already on the radar of Child Protection Services suddenly disappear, the statistical likelihood of a tragic outcome increases dramatically. That's why the Major Crime Unit was called in immediately. That's why digital forensics specialists were deployed. That's why the Truth Verification Section was summoned. That's why the polygraph questions focused on death rather than disappearance. The system knew this family. The system had been watching this family. And when Lily and Jack Sullivan disappeared, the system immediately assumed the worst because their experience told them that the worst was probably what had happened. By June 2025, this investigation had become one of the largest in Nova Scotia's history. 11 RCMP divisions were actively working on the case. Major crimes, digital forensics, truth verification, and police dog services were all involved. They had collected more than 500 tips from the public. They had conducted 54 formal interviews. They had gathered hundreds of hours of video recordings. They had searched septic tanks, wells, and abandoned mines. And they had done something else. Something that revealed just how seriously they were taking this case. The Nova Scotia government had offered a $150,000 reward for information leading to the resolution of this case. That reward was offered under a program specifically designed for unsolved major crimes. Out of 122 active cases in that program, the vast majority were murders. The system wasn't just treating this as a missing persons case. They were treating it as a homicide investigation. And they were doing everything in their power to solve it. But despite all of these resources, despite all of these efforts, despite all of this investigation, two crucial questions remained unanswered. Where were Lily and Jack Sullivan? And were they still alive? The answer to those questions would come from an unexpected source. It would come from the behavior of the adults who were supposed to be protecting these children. It would come from the actions they took and the decisions they made in the days and weeks following the children's disappearance. And it would reveal that sometimes the most telling evidence in a case isn't what people say or what they do publicly. Sometimes the most telling evidence is what they don't say and what they do when they think no one is watching. They say that in criminal investigations, behavior tells a story that words cannot. The way people act when they think no one is watching, the decisions they make under pressure, the patterns of their actions, these things reveal truth in ways that statements and interviews never can. In the case of Lily and Jack Sullivan, the behavior of the key adults in their lives would prove to be more revealing than any polygraph test or police interrogation. Let's start with Maleia Brooks Murray, the children's mother. On May 3rd, the day after she reported her children missing, Maleia disappeared. Not physically. She was still in Nova Scotia, still technically cooperating with the investigation. But she vanished from public view in a way that spoke volumes about her state of mind. She blocked her stepfather on social media. She cut off communication with extended family members. She refused to appear publicly to plead for her children's safe return. She avoided the media entirely. This wasn't the behavior of a frantic mother desperately searching for her missing children. This was the behavior of someone who was hiding something. But Maleia's behavior was nothing compared to what Daniel Martell was doing on social media. In the immediate aftermath of the children's disappearance, Daniel had posted romantic messages directed at Maleia. Messages like, "Maleia, I will be the Daniel you met at the waterfalls," the kind of nostalgic, emotional appeals that suggested he was trying to reconnect with her during a difficult time. But as the weeks passed, as the investigation intensified, as the pressure mounted, Daniel's messages became increasingly aggressive and threatening. "Maleia, Meadow and I will visit you in prison." This wasn't the language of a grieving stepfather worried about his missing stepchildren. This was the language of someone who believed he knew exactly what had happened to those children and exactly who was responsible. Daniel's social media activity revealed something else crucial about the family dynamics. He wasn't just making random accusations. He was providing a running commentary on the investigation, sharing information that suggested he had inside knowledge of what law enforcement was thinking and doing. But perhaps the most telling behavior came from Maleia's extended family. From day one, Maleia's relatives had accused Daniel of being responsible for the children's disappearance. This wasn't speculation or finger-pointing based on general suspicion. This was specific, targeted accusation that suggested they knew something about the family dynamics that the public didn't. The tension between Daniel and Maleia's family became so intense that it led to a physical altercation in their yard, with relatives directly confronting Daniel about what he had done to the children. This wasn't normal family behavior during a missing persons case. Families typically rally together during crises. They support each other. They present a united front in their appeals for help from the public. But that's not what happened here. Instead, from the very beginning, this family was divided into camps, with each side accusing the other of being responsible for the children's disappearance. And then there was the strange detail about the cadaver dogs. The RCMP had deployed tracking dogs to search for the children. They had brought in specialized canine units to help with the investigation. But they had deliberately chosen not to use cadaver dogs, the ones specifically trained to locate human remains. When asked about this decision, the RCMP gave a carefully worded response. Any searches involving dogs will be based on information gathered during the ongoing investigation. What information? What did they know that would make them avoid using dogs trained to find bodies? The answer to that question would come from another behavioral revelation. On May 28th, more than 3 weeks after the children disappeared, police revealed that Lily and Jack had been captured on surveillance cameras on May 1st in New Glasgow with the family. This was the last confirmed sighting of the children alive. From May 1st at 2 p.m. until the morning of May 2nd when Maleia called 911, approximately 20 critical hours had elapsed. 20 hours during which something had happened that would change everything. But what was happening during those crucial hours? What were the adults doing while the children were in their care for the last time? The answer to that question would come from the most dramatic behavioral revelation of all. At the end of June, nearly 2 months after the children disappeared, Maleia Brooks Murray made a decision that many experts interpreted as an admission of guilt. She suddenly violated Child Protective Services orders and fled from her mother's house in Wentworth, taking baby Meadow with her. Her destination was the Saipekankatik Reservation, where she may have believed she would be outside the jurisdiction of Nova Scotia authorities. Her mother tried to physically stop her from leaving with the baby. There was a struggle. There were tears. There were desperate pleas. But Maleia was determined to run. The outcome was exactly what anyone familiar with child protection law would have predicted. Child Protective Services immediately removed baby Meadow from Maleia's care. The system that had failed to protect Lily and Jack moved swiftly to protect their baby sister. But Maleia's flight to the reservation revealed something else. Something that would prove to be the key to understanding what really happened during those final hours before Lily and Jack disappeared. Daniel Martell, watching these events unfold, made a public statement that would change everything. Maleia is on the run from the RCMP. She knows everything. She couldn't stay around me because she would break down. I would find out the truth. This wasn't the statement of a man who was confused about what had happened to his stepchildren. This was the statement of a man who believed he knew exactly what had happened and exactly who was responsible. But it was also the statement of a man who was afraid. Afraid that the truth was about to come out. Afraid that the pressure of the investigation was reaching a breaking point. Afraid that time was running out for everyone involved. And he was right to be afraid. Because at that very moment, someone else was preparing to break their silence. Someone who claimed to know the entire truth about what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. Someone who would either provide the key to finding the children alive or reveal the location of their bodies. After 8 weeks of silence, after watching the investigation unfold from the sidelines, after seeing families torn apart and communities mobilized in search of 2 missing children, one man could no longer keep quiet. His name was Darren Gettis, and what he was about to reveal would either save Lily and Jack Sullivan's lives or confirm everyone's worst fears about their fate. Darren Gettis wasn't just another concerned citizen following the case from afar. He was Maleia Brooks Murray's second cousin. He had known this family for years. His son had even worked with Daniel Martell. If anyone had inside knowledge of the family dynamics, the personalities involved, and the events that led to the children's disappearance, it was Darren. For 30 years, Darren had managed an excavation business in the Trenton, Nova Scotia region. He was a practical man, a working man, someone who understood the value of hard work and honest dealing. He wasn't prone to flights of fancy or conspiracy theories. But as he watched the investigation unfold, as he saw the resources being deployed, as he witnessed the pain and anguish of everyone involved, Darren Gettis came to a conclusion that would shock the world. "The children are alive," he declared with absolute confidence. "I am 1000% sure." This wasn't speculation. This wasn't wishful thinking. According to Darren, this was a statement based on specific information from a source he described as very important, very knowledgeable, right in the center of everything. Darren claimed that he knew exactly what had happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. He knew who was involved. He knew where they were, and he knew why they had been hidden. But his revelation came with a desperate warning. Time was running out. According to Darren's theory, the children were no longer in Nova Scotia. They had been moved, possibly outside the country, and were being cared for by what he described as Maleia's native people, a reference to the indigenous communities that had connections to the family. But here's where Darren's story takes a dramatic turn. He claimed that this wasn't a kidnapping in the traditional sense. This wasn't a case of strangers taking children for nefarious purposes. This was a case of friends and family members trying to help a young mother escape what they perceived as a dangerous situation. Maleia is a young girl, very gentle, very impressionable, Darren explained. She had a group of friends about her age who decided to help her get out of the situation. Think about a group of young girls trying to get their friend out of trouble. How stupid they can be. According to Darren's version of events, the plan was set in motion long before May 2nd. Maleia had been unhappy with Daniel. She had been dealing with postpartum depression and post-traumatic stress. She had confided in friends and relatives about her situation. And those friends and relatives had decided to help her escape. But their plan had a fatal flaw. They hadn't accounted for the neighbor, Janie, who lived across the street from the Sullivan home. Here's Darren's reconstruction of what happened on the morning of May 2nd. "I am very sure that Maleia walked the children to the edge of the road and put them in a car. I am 80% sure I know who was driving the car. However, there was a snag in their plan. Neighbor Janie unexpectedly happened to be home and walked out to the road precisely as the children were being transferred." According to Darren, Maleia had never expected Janie to be home that early in the morning. The neighbor's appearance at the critical moment had caught everyone off guard. Janie surprised Maleia on the roadside. Janie looked at Maleia and asked, "What have you done?" And Maleia just stood there, stunned. This theory explained several things that had puzzled investigators. It explained Maleia's strange behavior that Daniel had described, how she had stood by the road with her phone and appeared guilty when he found her. It explained why she had been so reluctant to speak publicly about the children's disappearance. It explained why she had ultimately fled to the reservation. But Darren's theory also came with a chilling warning. If these children are still alive, and if they are where I think they are, we are closing in on you and you know it. If you panic and harm these children, thinking you'll get rid of them and not get caught, you're wrong. Bring these children to the light of day. This wasn't just a theory. This was a desperate plea from someone who believed that Lily and Jack Sullivan were alive, but in mortal danger. Darren Gettis was convinced that the people who had taken the children were feeling the pressure of the investigation. The media attention was intensifying. The police resources were expanding. The net was closing in. And history had shown that when people involved in hiding children begin to panic, when they realize they're about to be discovered, they sometimes make desperate decisions with tragic consequences. "I want the cops to move. Don't waste time," Darren demanded. 7 weeks have passed. You have the resources. According to Darren, the children could be anywhere from a farmhouse near Tatamagouche to Plattsburgh, New York. They might have even been moved through a reservation that borders Canada and the United States, making jurisdictional issues complicated for law enforcement. But Darren's most shocking claim was yet to come. He said he was willing to stake his credibility on his theory. "If I turn out to be wrong, I will fully expose my source." This was a man putting everything on the line. His reputation, his relationships, his standing in the community. All of it was at stake based on his belief that he knew what had happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. But as compelling as Darren's theory was, it raised as many questions as it answered. If friends and family members had taken the children to help Maleia escape a bad situation, why hadn't they come forward when the investigation began? Why hadn't they revealed the children's location when they saw the massive search efforts being deployed? Why had they allowed the entire province to mobilize in search of children they knew were safe? The answer to those questions would reveal the final, most heartbreaking truth about the Lily and Jack Sullivan case. 8 weeks. That's how long Lily and Jack Sullivan had been missing when Darren Gettis made his explosive claims about their whereabouts. 8 weeks of searching, investigating, and hoping. But according to Darren, those 8 weeks had also been 8 weeks of escalating danger for the children. If his theory was correct, if the children were indeed being hidden by friends and family members who thought they were helping Maleia escape a dangerous situation, then every day that passed increased the risk to Lily and Jack's lives. Think about it from the perspective of the people who might be hiding them. They had started with good intentions, helping a young mother and her children escape what they perceived as a harmful situation. But as the investigation intensified, as the media attention grew, as the police resources expanded, those good intentions would begin to feel like a trap. The people hiding the children would realize that they were no longer just helping a friend. They were obstructing a major criminal investigation. They were interfering with law enforcement. They were potentially facing serious criminal charges themselves. And people who are trapped, people who are facing the prospect of serious legal consequences, sometimes make desperate decisions. Darren Gettis understood this dynamic. He had watched the investigation unfold. He had seen the resources being deployed. He had witnessed the intensity of the search efforts. And he was terrified that the people hiding the children were going to panic. Every day, every hour could be critical, he warned. People involved in hiding children may panic. The pressure from the investigation is mounting, and media attention is intensifying. History has shown cases where attempts to protect children ended tragically when participants realized they would be discovered. This wasn't theoretical. There were documented cases of well-meaning people who had taken children to protect them, only to harm them when they realized they were about to be caught. The pressure was building from multiple directions. The RCMP had deployed 11 divisions to work on the case. They had collected more than 500 tips from the public. They had conducted 54 formal interviews. They had gathered hundreds of hours of video recordings. They had searched septic tanks, wells, and abandoned mines. They had offered a $150,000 reward for information. They had reclassified the case from missing persons to major crimes. The investigation was reaching a crescendo. And if Darren Gettis was right, that crescendo was putting Lily and Jack Sullivan in more danger with each passing day. But there was another factor that made the situation even more urgent. The behavior of the adults who were supposed to be protecting the children was becoming increasingly erratic. Maleia Brooks Murray had fled to the reservation with baby Meadow, only to have the infant removed from her care by Child Protective Services. She was now a mother who had lost 3 children, 2 to disappearance, 1 to the system. Daniel Martell was posting increasingly aggressive messages on social media, making threats and accusations that suggested he was reaching a breaking point. The extended family was divided into warring camps, with each side accusing the other of being responsible for the children's disappearance. Everyone involved in this case was under enormous pressure. Everyone was being watched. Everyone was being scrutinized. And everyone was beginning to crack under the weight of the investigation. This was exactly the kind of situation that led to tragic outcomes in missing children cases. When adults are under pressure, when they're facing serious consequences, when they're running out of options, they sometimes make decisions that put the children in even more danger. Search dogs had traced the children's scent to the road where it abruptly ended. This strongly suggested they had been taken away by car. But by whom? Where? And most importantly, were they still alive? The evidence pointed in multiple directions. The police behavior suggested they believed the children were dead. The polygraph questions had focused on murder, not kidnapping. The investigation had been treated as a major crimes case from day one. But Darren Gettis was insisting that the children were alive. He was claiming that he knew where they were. He was demanding that law enforcement act quickly to save them. The question was, who was right? Were Lily and Jack Sullivan victims of violence, as the police seemed to believe? Or were they hidden victims of a misguided rescue attempt, as Darren Gettis claimed? The answer to that question would determine whether the story ended with the recovery of 2 bodies or the reunion of a family. And according to Darren Gettis, time was running out to make that determination. If these children are alive, but if they are where I think they are, we are closing in on you and you know it. He warned the people he believed were hiding them. This isn't just a theory. This is a stark warning that time is running out. The investigation was at a critical juncture. The pressure was at its peak. The behavior of everyone involved was becoming increasingly unpredictable. And somewhere, whether in a hidden location where they were being cared for by well-meaning friends, or in a grave that investigators had yet to discover, 6-year-old Lily and 4-year-old Jack Sullivan were waiting to be found. Their fate would depend on what happened next. It would depend on whether law enforcement believed Darren Gettis' theory or continued to pursue their investigation as a homicide case. It would depend on whether the people who might be hiding them would come forward voluntarily or wait to be discovered. And most importantly, it would depend on whether there was still time to save them. As we reach the end of this story, we're left with more questions than answers. But sometimes, that's the most honest way to end a true crime case, not with neat resolutions and tidy conclusions, but with the messy, complicated reality of human behavior and the limitations of our justice system. The truth about what happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan may never be fully known. But what we do know reveals a story that goes far beyond a simple missing persons case. We know that this was a family in crisis long before the children disappeared. We know that Child Protective Services had an existing file on these children. We know that the adults who were supposed to protect them had criminal histories, substance abuse issues, and patterns of behavior that put the children at risk. We know that from day one, law enforcement treated this as a homicide investigation rather than a missing persons case. We know that the polygraph questions focused on death, not disappearance. We know that the resources deployed were typical of major crimes investigations, not search and rescue operations. We know that the behavior of the adults involved, the social media posts, the accusations, the flight to the reservation, the violation of court orders, was not the behavior of innocent people desperately searching for missing children. But we also know that Darren Gettis, a family member with inside knowledge, believed with complete certainty that the children were alive. His theory, that friends and family members had taken the children to help Maleia escape a dangerous situation, provided an alternative explanation for everything that had happened. If Darren was right, then Lily and Jack Sullivan were victims of a misguided rescue attempt. They were hidden by people who thought they were helping, but who had unknowingly put the children in even more danger by obstructing the investigation. If Darren was wrong, then the children were victims of violence, and the investigation was a criminal case disguised as a missing person search. The truth may lie somewhere in between these two theories. It may be more complex than either explanation suggests. It may involve elements of both, well-meaning people who made terrible decisions and adults who failed to protect the children they were supposed to care for. What we know for certain is that 2 innocent children paid the price for the failures of the adults around them. Whether they paid with their lives or with their freedom, whether they are buried in an unmarked grave or hidden in a distant location, Lily and Jack Sullivan became victims of a system that failed to protect them. Their story is a reminder that child protection is not just the responsibility of government agencies. It's the responsibility of all of us, family members, neighbors, teachers, community members, to speak up when we see children at risk. It's a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous threats to children come not from strangers, but from the people closest to them. And it's a reminder that in our eagerness to help, in our desire to protect, we can sometimes make situations worse rather than better. The search for Lily and Jack Sullivan continues. The investigation remains active. The reward is still being offered. And somewhere, whether in this world or the next, 2 children are waiting to be found. Their story deserves to be told. Their voices deserve to be heard. And their fate deserves to be known. If this case has moved you, if their story has touched your heart, If you believe that every child deserves protection and justice, then please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We have more stories that need to be told, more voices that need to be heard, more cases that deserve attention. Share your thoughts, your theories, your feelings about this case in the comments below. Let us know what you think happened to Lily and Jack Sullivan. Tell us whether you believe Darren Gettis' theory or whether you think the police investigation was on the right track. But most importantly, remember their names. Remember their faces. Remember that they were real children with real dreams, real personalities, and real futures that were cut short by the failures of the adults who were supposed to protect them. Lily Sullivan, 6 years old, with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile that lit up her grandmother's world. Jack Sullivan, 4 years old, with serious eyes and a curious mind that wanted to understand everything around him. They deserved better than what they got. They deserved protection, love, and a chance to grow up safe and happy. And they deserve to have their story told, so that perhaps other children in similar situations can be saved before it's too late. Thank you for following Lily and Jack Sullivan's story to the end. If this case moved you, hit like and subscribe. We have more stories that deserve to be heard. Share your thoughts, your feelings, and your final theory in the comments below. The truth about what happened to these children may never be fully known. But by telling their story, by keeping their memory alive, by demanding justice for all children who face similar dangers, we can honor their lives and perhaps prevent other tragedies from occurring. Lily and Jack Sullivan. Remember their names. Remember their story. And never forget that every child deserves to be safe.